This week on In Post, I'm going to take what turned out not to be a great color image and make it a black and white. Hi everyone, I'm Scott Davenport, and thanks very much for joining me this week on In Post. So the image we're going to look at today, I had hoped would be a nice colorful sunset. And as it turned out, the color in the sky just didn't explode as I had hoped. And so pretty quickly into the processing for this image, I realized that I was going to go black and white. And so let's get over to the computer. We'll take a look at that process, and I'll even show you where I had the aha moment. All right, this is not going to work color-wise. Let's shift gears and think about this in terms of black and white. So I took a bunch of different frames over the course of the sunset, and you can see some of them are underexposed, some of them are overexposed, catching all the different levels of the dynamic range out there. And I settled on these 4 frames to blend together. This one on the left, primarily for the sky. This being my base image, I liked how the waves were here, and then this leading line up to this gap in the rocks. This image here to get smoother sand around the edge. Once the tide came in, all these footprints we see over here got washed away. And then finally this overexposed image just for a little more detail in the rocks. And you can tell from the fact that there's footprints here, they're not here, and then there's footprints here again. These were taken at a variety of times over the course of about 20 minutes. So the tripod's just fixed in place, and I'm taking all these shots. So I'm going to grab all of these and bring them into perfect layers as layers and start to blend those together. I have the 4 images loaded in layers now, and my base image is on the top, and right beneath it I have the underexposed image for the sky. Now because of the fact that I've got the sun on the right hand side of the frame, I'm getting a lot more light on the right hand side, and this left side is pretty harshly vignetted. And so when I blended these together, I did use just a gradient bug and dropping that here, but I angled it kind of in this fashion to try to get a smoother blend. I didn't want to bring in all that dark side of this sky. I just wanted to bring back some of the details in the oranges and the clouds here. And so played around with this, played by positioning the pivot point at the sun and see what that did, moving it around a bit. And for now, I'll just kind of leave it about there. And I was quite aggressive with merging in the sense that I wasn't keeping these layers around very long. Once I got something, I said, okay, that looks pretty good, merge it down. And just keeping my layer count lower as a result of doing that. So I took care of those 2 pieces. Next underneath, we have this smoother water down here. And so there's a couple of ways to approach this, and what I chose to do was start again with a masking bug. Just drop that down, flip it around, position it down here, fade it out a little bit. So I'm getting the nice smooth sand here. Now the thing I have to be careful of is on the rocks, on the rock hand side here. So rock hand side, left hand side here. You can see that there's a bit of an unnatural line. If I were to, let's see, reset that mask. Let's see, reset the mask, and then I'm going to undo that. It's not too bad. There's just a little bit of gradation there where the 2 different frames have 2 different exposures. And so to help clean that up, I will turn on the mask view with Control M. You can see things here. I just grab the mask brush and I will just kind of, whoops, wrong mode. X to put that to paint in, make my feather a little bit larger, just using the shift bracket key there, and just kind of paint some of that away from this rock so that I'm keeping the rock from my top exposure and just blending that away. I could do the same thing through here, but quite honestly, since most of this is covered and I know what I'm going to do in the next step, I didn't worry about that much at all. And so good with that, merge it down. And then the last thing that I did was underneath here we have a brighter exposure, and it has more texture in the rocks as a result. And I just used the masking brush for this with a very low opacity, something like, I think I started at about 20. And just, oops, X to paint out, and just started to paint through here a little bit, particularly on this little outcropping, so I could get some more separation of this jut of rock with the base here, and then just getting some more detail. And did the same thing through here. I'm being kind of sloppy with this right now because I've already got this done in another document. But went through, did all those types of things. So with all the merging done, this is the single exposure, quote unquote, that I came away with, and it's very flat. And that's, you know, intentionally by design. I tended to blend all things to get a flat, even exposure, and then start working through, you know, the very stylization. One thing you will notice is I did some cleanup work on the rock here. Somebody, apparently named Carlos, had carved their name into the rock. And shame on you, Carlos, you shouldn't do that. I brushed you away, and you're gone from there. So using a combination of the cloning tools and the magic, the perfect eraser, although it is kind of magical. So from here, took this into effects and pretty quickly determined I was going to go black and white. So let me turn back on the effects layer here. There we go. And once those apply, I'll jump into effects so you can see exactly what I did and where I really determined this is not working in color. So that's okay because I will see black and white in a little bit. Alright, so I began with basic tone, just doing a tone adjustment. Took the auto and then played around a bit with the whites and the highlights, trying to even things out, and did boost detail and clarity, primarily for the rocks. Didn't do any masking on that either. And the same for dynamic contrast, just a little touch upwards. These are custom settings. I started with natural and backed off the medium and the large. Gave a little bit of bump to the smalls for, again, these little tiny bits within the rocks themselves. Now for the adjustable gradient. This is where I started trying to darken the sky and get more color here, and that just wasn't looking very good. And so I shifted gears. You'll notice that this is actually brightening. And if you look at the mask, you can see what I'm doing is I'm brightening the ocean, and that's really it. I'm not applying it to the rocks. And this is about where I said, you know, this is not working for me color, so this is going to be bound. I'm going to go black and white with this. So I wanted to make sure I had more contrast and more separation between my lights and my darks, so these rocks wouldn't get lost in a black and white conversion. You know, here, this area of the ocean is pretty dark, and it starts to match some of the tonality of these rocks here. By brightening up the ocean, I'm going to get more separation of those shapes and those forms. Continuing upward, another adjustable gradient, once again, doing further brightening, this time just across the board, this entire thing here. Again, this is where I want the eyes to be. This is the interesting part. These are the interesting shapes. And they kind of make that arcing leading line connecting with this water line, ultimately going off to the sun in the distance. And I did play with color, despite the fact I was going to go to black and white. This was, you know, just to bring a little more of the deeper blue into the sky, so when that converts to black and white, it would, you know, look a little better, wouldn't just look completely washed out. A good way to check, am I gonna, you know, if you're gonna go black and white, is just grabbing a black and white filter and just dropping it on there. And so, you know, here's roughly, okay, this is what I'm gonna get. Kind of a matte look. You know, like a matte landscape type of approach to this image, not tons of contrast yet. And I actually did this at a few points along the way, and that helped me fine-tune using these adjustable gradients to get brightness in the right areas. So let me remove that. I will cancel this since we've already done all of these things. And now let's look what happened in black and white. So I'll double-click black and white, launch that module. Alright, so in black and white, again, played with the brightness a little bit more, still brought it up, and that's really just taking this right half of the image and almost blowing it out. Still some hints of detail there, but just letting that fade off into nearly infinity. And just some minor touches to contrast and to whites so that we could get a little more separation in the rocks here. Did not do anything with color response, tone curve. did add a glow. Let me toggle that on and off. So the glow adds just a softer feeling to things overall. And for this scene, I think that was better than leaving the details in the water and even in the rocks to a degree, just softening everything. Toner's the one other area that I did play with quite a bit, and mainly for the shadows. You can see this plumish color for the shadow areas, and next to nothing in the highlights, and even just keeping it a gray. But as I turn that off and on, you can see this was a straight black and white conversion. This added just a bit of that deep purple tone to it. Also sharpened. Standard progressive sharpening. Since I shoot in RAW, there's always some level of sharpening that needs to be done. Normally I sharpen selected areas of my image, but let's be honest, this is not one of my stronger photos, and so I'm not going to spend more time on something that ultimately is a ho-hum image. One other thing to point out is I did do some things with the brightness brushes and the detail brushes. So if I click on one of those, I'm going to do Control M to show the mask, and so you can see down here that changes it to brush strokes. I added some brightness to this portion of this rock, and I removed or darkened this portion of this rock. So you can see that gives a little more separation. So we can see that there's a drop to the beach, there's this ledge, and then there's this a second ledge in this rock here. So getting that more three-dimensional look to it just by playing with the brightness and darkness. I also did something similar with detail and actually removed detail, softening things further. The water was still a little too crisp in those areas. I wanted the sky to be softer, anywhere there was white clouds. And I even backed off some of the detail on bits of the rocks because they were just jumping out too much. Trying to go for that overall matte landscape look. So that's the end of this image. So I guess before going into black and white, we were here, and then we're here. And I think this image does work better as a black and white because color, it's just kind of drab. There's not a lot happening there. Black and white, it's a little more interesting. So the shot's okay. It's not one of my all-time favorites. And it was more to keep practicing post-processing, work on blending, had to do some retouching on one of the rocks, and thinking in terms of black and white as you're doing your contrast adjustments, or even just trying to fine-tune the color, but thinking of it in terms of a black and white image. So this was a practice image. So thanks very much for joining me this week on In Post, and I'd love to hear from you. So please reach out, contact me. Let me know if you've got a question about post-processing. You'd just like to say, hi, I like your show, thanks very much. Connect with me on social media. All my social links are there. It'd be great. So I look forward to hearing from you. And until next time, thanks again for watching. I'll see you soon.